The rain had been falling for 3 hours when Evangeline Matthews finally accepted that her bridegroom was not coming. She knelt in the mud outside the small wooden church in Cedar Falls, her once pristine wedding dress now stained with dirt and soaked through to her skin, watching as the last of the wedding guests hurried away with whispered apologies and sympathetic glances. It was June 1878. And the Colorado Territory was still a place where a woman's reputation could be destroyed by circumstances beyond her control. At 22, Evangeline had been considered fortunate to catch the attention of Harold Wickham, a prosperous merchant from Denver who had promised her a life of security and respectability. Now, as she sat abandoned in the rain, she realized that fortune had a cruel sense of humor. The thunder that had been rumbling in the distance all morning finally broke overhead with a crack that seemed to split the world in half. Evangeline didn't flinch, though the sound made several of the remaining townspeople jump. She had reached a point beyond caring about storms, both literal and metaphorical. "Miss Matthews," called Reverend Williams, hurrying down the church steps with his coat held over his head. "Please come inside out of this weather. You'll catch your death." Evangeline looked up at the kindly minister, her blue eyes reflecting a pain that had nothing to do with the cold rain. "I think I'll stay here a bit longer, Reverend." "Perhaps he's just delayed." The Reverend's expression softened with pity. He had been the one to receive Harold's hastily scrawled note that morning, delivered by a boy from the telegraph office. The message had been brief and cruel. "Urgent business requires immediate departure. Stop wedding postponed indefinitely. Stop will write soon stop." "My dear," Reverend Williams said gently, "I think it might be best if you came inside and we discussed what happened. There are things you need to know." But Evangeline shook her head, clutching her wilted bouquet of wild roses to her chest. "He'll come. He promised he would come." It was then that a small voice piped up from behind them, clear and unafraid, despite the storm raging overhead. "Mama, look at the pretty lady kneeling in the rain. She looks like an angel who fell from heaven." Both Evangeline and Reverend Williams turned to see a little girl of perhaps 8 years old, standing under the church's covered walkway. She had strawberry blonde hair that escaped from her neat braids in wild curls, and her face was dotted with freckles that seemed to dance when she smiled. Beside her stood a tall man in a worn but clean cowboy hat, his weathered face showing concern as he took in the scene before him. "Hush, Rosie," the man said quietly, but not unkindly. "The lady is having a difficult time." The little girl named Rosie stepped out into the rain without hesitation, ignoring her father's startled protest. She approached Evangeline with the fearless compassion that seemed to be the exclusive province of children, kneeling down in the mud beside her without any concern for her own Sunday dress. "Are you an angel?" Rosie asked, with the directness that only children possess. "Because you're the most beautiful lady I've ever seen, even with your dress all muddy." Evangeline looked down at the child with surprise, seeing in her freckled face a kindness that seemed to shine from within. "I'm not an angel, sweetheart. I'm just someone who made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" Rosie asked, settling more comfortably in the mud as if preparing for a long conversation. "I believed someone who wasn't telling me the truth," Evangeline said softly, surprised by her own honesty. "I thought someone loved me, but I was wrong." Rosie considered this with the seriousness that children bring to important matters. "Well, that's silly of them. Anyone can see you're someone worth loving. You have kind eyes and a gentle voice, and you smell like flowers even in the rain." The simple declaration, delivered with such conviction, brought tears to Evangeline's eyes. Here was a child who saw past the muddy dress and the desperate circumstances to something essential and worthy. "Rosie," the man called from under the walkway, his voice carrying a note of gentle authority. "Come back here before you catch cold." "Papa, you have to meet the angel lady," Rosie called back. "She's sad because someone was mean to her." The man approached slowly, and Evangeline could see that he was younger than she had first thought, probably in his early 30s. He had dark hair that showed beneath his hat and brown eyes that held a mixture of kindness and caution. There was something about his weathered hands and the way he moved that spoke of a man accustomed to hard work and honest living. "I'm sorry for the intrusion." "Miss," he said, touching the brim of his hat politely. "I'm Nathan Cole, and this is my daughter Rose. We were just leaving service when the storm hit." "I'm Evangeline Matthews," she replied, struggling to maintain some semblance of dignity despite her bedraggled state. "And please don't apologize. Your daughter has been very kind to me." Nathan's eyes took in the wedding dress, the abandoned bouquet, and the obvious distress of the young woman kneeling in the mud. His expression darkened with understanding and something that might have been anger on her behalf. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying so, any man who would leave a lady like you waiting in the rain isn't worthy of the name gentleman," he said quietly. "Papa's right," Rosie added with the absolute certainty of childhood. "And besides, I think you came here for a reason. Maybe you're supposed to be our angel instead." "Rose," Nathan said gently, "what have I told you about?" But he was interrupted by Reverend Williams, who had been watching the interaction with growing interest. "Mr. Cole, perhaps you could help Miss Matthews inside out of this weather. I believe there are matters that need to be discussed." Nathan extended his hand to Evangeline without hesitation. "May I help you up, miss? It's not fitting for a lady to be kneeling in the mud, whatever the circumstances." Evangeline looked up at his weathered hand, seeing in it the promise of kindness without obligation. Slowly, she reached out and allowed him to help her to her feet. His touch was gentle but firm, and she felt steadier than she had since the morning began. Inside the warm, dry church, Reverend Williams shared the contents of Harold's telegram, while Nathan built up the fire in the small stove that heated the building. Rosie sat beside Evangeline on the wooden pew, chattering quietly about everything from the behavior of her pet kitten to the flowers that grew wild on her father's ranch. "So you see," Reverend Williams concluded gently, "Mr. Wickham has made it clear that he will not be honoring his commitment. I'm afraid the wedding is quite definitely off." Evangeline absorbed this information with a numbness that surprised her. She had spent the last 3 hours hoping against hope, but hearing it stated so plainly brought a strange kind of relief. "What will I do now?" she asked quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "You'll start over," Nathan said from where he was tending the fire. "You'll find something better than a man who would abandon his bride without even the courtesy of an explanation." "But I have nowhere to go," Evangeline said, the reality of her situation beginning to sink in. "I gave up my position as a governess to prepare for the wedding. I sold most of my belongings. Everything I own is in that trunk outside." Rosie looked up at her with concern. "Where will you sleep tonight? What will you eat?" The practical questions from a child cut straight to the heart of Evangeline's predicament. She had been so focused on the shame and disappointment of being abandoned that she hadn't fully considered the immediate practical consequences. "I suppose I'll find a room somewhere," she said uncertainly. "Perhaps I can find another position as a governess or a teacher." "Nonsense," Nathan said firmly, turning from the fire to face her. "You can't go looking for work in a wet wedding dress with nowhere to stay. Rose and I have plenty of room at our ranch, and we could use some help around the place." "Papa, yes," Rosie exclaimed, clapping her hands together. "The angel lady could stay with us and help take care of the house and maybe teach me more letters and numbers." Evangeline stared at them both, overwhelmed by the kindness of near strangers. "Mr. Cole, I couldn't possibly impose on you like that. You don't know anything about me." "I know you're a lady in need of help," Nathan replied simply. "I know you've been treated badly by someone who should have protected you. And I know my daughter has taken a liking to you, which is recommendation enough for me." "But what will people say?" Evangeline asked, though the question sounded weak even to her own ears. "They'll say that Nathan Cole helped a lady in distress." "Same as his daddy taught him," Nathan said firmly. "And if they want to say anything else, they can say it to my face." Reverend Williams, who had been listening to this exchange with growing approval, cleared his throat. "Miss Matthews, if I may offer some counsel, the good Lord sometimes closes one door in order to open another. Perhaps this disappointment, painful as it is, is leading you toward something better. Evangeline looked around at the faces surrounding her. The kindly minister, the concerned rancher, and the freckle-faced little girl who had called her an angel. In their eyes, she saw none of the pity or judgment she had expected, only genuine concern and offered friendship. "Mr. Cole," she said slowly, "if you're certain it wouldn't be an imposition, I would be grateful for a place to stay until I can make other arrangements." "It's settled then," Nathan said with satisfaction. "We'll head home as soon as this storm passes. Rose, you can show Miss Matthews where she'll be staying and help her get settled." As if summoned by his words, the rain began to lighten, and shafts of sunlight broke through the storm clouds. Evangeline took it as a sign that perhaps Reverend Williams was right about doors closing and opening. The ride to Nathan's ranch gave Evangeline her first real look at the Colorado territory beyond the small town of Cedar Falls. The landscape was vast and beautiful, with rolling hills covered in prairie grass and groves of aspen trees that shimmered silver in the returning sunlight. Mountains rose in the distance like sleeping giants, their peaks still capped with snow despite the June warmth. Nathan drove the wagon with easy competence, while Rosie chattered away beside him, pointing out landmarks and telling Evangeline about the various animals that lived on their ranch. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Evangeline found herself smiling for the first time since the morning's disaster. "That's where the creek runs widest," Rosie said, pointing to a line of cottonwood trees. "Papa taught me to fish there, and sometimes we see deer coming to drink in the early morning." "It sounds lovely," Evangeline said, meaning it. After years of working in stuffy city houses, the idea of wide open spaces and clean air seemed like a dream. "Do you like animals?" Rosie asked. "We have horses and cattle and chickens and my cat Oscar and Papa's dog Blue. They're all very friendly, especially if you give them treats." "I like animals very much," Evangeline replied, "though I haven't had much opportunity to be around them in recent years." Nathan glanced back at her with interest. "What kind of work were you doing before?" "Before today, I was a governess for a family in Denver," Evangeline explained, teaching their children reading, writing, arithmetic, and music. "Before that, I taught at a small school in Kansas." "A teacher," Nathan said with approval. "Rose could certainly benefit from more formal education than I can provide. I can read and write and cipher numbers well enough, but I know there's more she should be learning." "I'd be happy to help with Rose's education," Evangeline said, warming to the idea. "She seems very bright and eager to learn." "I am," Rosie confirmed. "I can already read some books by myself, and I know my numbers up to 100. But I want to learn about faraway places and different languages and how to write beautiful letters." As they topped a rise, Nathan's ranch came into view, and Evangeline caught her breath at the sight. The main house was built of local stone and timber, with a wide front porch and large windows that would let in plenty of light. Outbuildings were arranged neatly around a central yard, and everywhere she looked, she saw signs of careful maintenance and pride in ownership. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. "My grandfather built the original cabin," Nathan said with quiet pride. "I've been adding to it and improving it since I took over. Want it to be something special for Rose to inherit someday." As they pulled up to the house, a blue-colored dog came bounding out to greet them, his tail wagging furiously. Behind him walked a woman of perhaps 50, wiping her hands on her apron and studying Evangeline with frank curiosity. "This is Mrs. Henderson," Nathan said as he helped Evangeline down from the wagon. "She comes by 3 times a week to help with the housework and cooking. Mrs. Henderson, this is Miss Matthews. She'll be staying with us for a while and helping with Rose's education." Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. About time this girl had some proper female influence. "Boy tries his best, but there's only so much a man can do when it comes to raising a daughter." "Mrs. Henderson," Rosie said, tugging on the woman's skirt. "Miss Matthews is an angel who came from heaven in a wedding dress. Isn't that exciting?" The older woman's eyebrows rose as she took in Evangeline's muddy, torn dress and bedraggled appearance. "Wedding dress, you say? Well, that's a story I'd like to hear." Over the next few hours, as Evangeline settled into the comfortable guest room and changed into one of her few remaining everyday dresses, The story of the morning's disaster was shared with Mrs. Henderson. The older woman's response was immediate and fierce. "That Harold Wickham ought to be horsewhipped," she declared, hands on her hips, "running off and leaving a nice girl like you at the altar." "Well, his loss is our gain," I say. "This house needs a lady's touch. And Rose needs a proper mother figure." "Mrs. Henderson," Evangeline said gently, "I'm only staying temporarily until I can find other employment." "We'll see about that," Mrs. Henderson said with a knowing smile. "Sometimes temporary has a way of becoming permanent when it's meant to be." That evening, as they sat down to dinner in the warm kitchen, Evangeline found herself marveling at how different her circumstances were from what she had expected when she woke that morning. Instead of beginning her married life in Harold's grand but cold house in Denver, she was sharing a simple meal with a kind widower and his delightful daughter, feeling more at home than she had in years. "Miss Matthews," Rosie said as they finished their meal, "will you tell me a story before bed tonight? Should be special since it's your first night here." "I'd be happy to," Evangeline replied. "What kind of story would you like?" "A story about angels," Rosie said promptly. "About how they come to Earth to help people who need them." Nathan met Evangeline's eyes across the table, and she saw in them a warmth that made her heart skip unexpectedly. "That sounds like a perfect story for tonight," he said quietly. Later, as Evangeline tucked Rosie into her small bed and told her a tale about angels who disguised themselves as ordinary people to bring help and hope to those who needed it most, she realized that perhaps she was living such a story herself. "Miss Matthews," Rosie said sleepily as Evangeline finished the story, "I'm glad you came to us today. Even if you're sad about the mean man who didn't marry you, I think you're exactly where you're supposed to be." "Why do you think that, sweetheart?" Evangeline asked, smoothing the child's hair. "Because Papa smiles more when you're here," Rosie said with the matter-of-fact wisdom of childhood. "And because when I prayed for someone to help take care of us, I asked for an angel. And then you came. Just like I asked for." As Evangeline made her way downstairs after Rosie fell asleep, she found Nathan sitting on the front porch, looking out at the star-filled sky. He looked up as she joined him, patting the chair beside his in invitation. "She's quite a remarkable child," Evangeline said, settling into the offered seat. "She is," Nathan agreed. "Sometimes I think she sees things more clearly than adults do. She certainly saw something special in you today." "She saved me," Evangeline said quietly. "I was ready to give up entirely when she came and sat with me in the mud. Her kindness reminded me that there's still goodness in the world." "There's goodness in you too," Nathan said seriously. "Anyone who would take the time to tell a lonely little girl bedtime stories and make her feel special is someone worth knowing." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch and watching the stars emerge one by one in the clear mountain air. "Nathan," Evangeline said finally, "why did you really invite me here? You don't know anything about my character or my background. For all you know, I could be running from something terrible." Nathan considered her question seriously before answering. "Because when I saw you kneeling in that mud, abandoned and hurt, but still holding on to your dignity, I recognized something I thought I'd lost forever." "What was that?" "Courage," he said simply. "It takes real courage to keep going when life knocks you down. My wife had that kind of courage. She faced her illness with grace and strength right up until the end. Seeing you today reminded me that there are still people in the world who don't let circumstances defeat them." Evangeline felt tears prick her eyes at the quiet conviction in his voice. "I don't feel very courageous. I feel like a fool for believing Harold's promises." "Believing in love doesn't make you a fool," Nathan said firmly. "It makes you someone with hope and faith in the goodness of others. The fact that this particular man wasn't worthy of that faith doesn't diminish your courage in offering it." Over the following weeks, Evangeline settled into life at the ranch with surprising ease. She took over Rose's formal education, creating lesson plans that combined traditional subjects with practical skills and nature study. Rose proved to be an eager and intelligent student, absorbing knowledge with the enthusiasm of someone who had been starved for intellectual stimulation. But more than just teaching, Evangeline found herself becoming part of the daily rhythm of ranch life. She helped Mrs. Henderson with the cooking and housework, tended a small garden of vegetables and flowers, and gradually learned about the cattle operation that formed the backbone of Nathan's livelihood. Nathan, for his part, seemed to come alive in ways that Mrs. Henderson assured Evangeline he hadn't since his wife's death 3 years earlier. He laughed more, talked more, and began taking pride in small improvements to the house and property that went beyond mere functionality. "He's building you a music room," Mrs. Henderson confided one afternoon as they watched Nathan and 2 hired hands working on an addition to the house. "Says every proper lady should have a place to play piano and sing." "He's doing no such thing," Evangeline protested, though her heart lifted at the thought. "It's probably just additional storage space." "Storage space with a big window facing east for the morning light and space for a piano," Mrs. Henderson said with a knowing smile. "That man is courting you, honey, whether you realize it or not." The idea that Nathan might be developing feelings for her was both thrilling and terrifying to Evangeline. She had come to care for him deeply, admiring his strength, his kindness, and his devotion to Rose. But the disaster of her relationship with Harold had left her cautious about trusting her own judgment when it came to matters of the heart. The turning point came on a warm evening in late July. Rose had gone to bed early after a busy day of lessons and play, and Evangeline was sitting in the parlor mending one of the child's dresses when Nathan appeared in the doorway. "Evangeline," he said, his voice carrying a seriousness that made her look up from her sewing. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" "Of course," she replied, setting aside her needlework. Nathan moved into the room but remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "I have something I need to say to you," he began, "and I hope you'll hear me out before you give me an answer." Evangeline's heart began to race, but she kept her expression calm. "I'm listening. These past weeks, having you here, watching you with Rose, seeing how you've brought life and warmth back to this house, it's made me realize something I thought I'd never feel again." He paused, gathering his courage before continuing. "I'm falling in love with you, Evangeline. Not because you're convenient, not because Rose needs a mother, but because you're the most remarkable woman I've ever known. You've taken the worst day of your life and turned it into something beautiful for all of us." Evangeline felt her breath catch in her throat. "Nathan, I know it's too soon," he continued quickly. "I know you've been hurt, and I know you might never be ready to trust another man with your heart. But I had to tell you how I feel because living with this secret was becoming impossible." "You think it's too soon," Evangeline said softly, rising from her chair to face him. "But what if I told you that I've been falling in love with you too, ever since that first day when you helped me up from the mud and treated me like someone worth saving?" Nathan's eyes widened with hope and disbelief. "Do you mean that?" "I mean it with all my heart," Evangeline replied, stepping closer to him. "You and Rose have given me something I never had with Harold. A home where I'm valued for who I am, not what I can provide. You've shown me what real love looks like, and it's nothing like what I thought I had before." When Nathan kissed her, it was with a reverence that took her breath away. His lips were gentle but sure, and Evangeline felt something inside her unfurl like a flower in sunlight. This was what she had been waiting for her whole life. Not the cold calculation of Harold's courtship, but this warm, generous love that asked for nothing but offered everything. "Marry me," Nathan whispered against her lips. "Yes," Evangeline whispered back, surprised by how easily the word came. "Yes, I'll marry you." From the top of the stairs came a small, delighted squeal. They looked up to see Rose in her nightgown, grinning down at them with obvious satisfaction. "I knew it," she called out in a stage whisper. "I knew the angel came here for us to keep forever, Rose." "You're supposed to be asleep," Nathan said, but his voice was warm with amusement rather than reproach. "I couldn't sleep because I heard Papa talking in his serious voice," Rose replied, patting down the stairs in her bare feet. "But now I'm happy because Miss Matthews is going to be my real mama, aren't you?" Evangeline knelt down as Rose reached the bottom of the stairs, gathering the little girl into her arms. "If you'd like me to be, sweetheart, I'd be honored to be your mama." "I prayed for this," Rose said with absolute conviction. "I prayed for Papa to be happy again and for me to have a mama who would love me and teach me things and smell like flowers. And God sent you in a wedding dress so I'd know you were meant for us." As Evangeline held Rose close and felt Nathan's strong arms encircle them both, she marveled at the mysterious ways that life could unfold. She had awakened that morning as Harold Wickham's intended bride, certain that she knew what her future held. Now she was surrounded by a love deeper and more genuine than anything she had ever imagined possible. They were married 6 weeks later in the same little church where Evangeline had been abandoned, but this time the ceremony was filled with joy instead of despair. Rose served as both flower girl and ring bearer, beaming with pride as she watched her beloved Miss Matthews become her official mama. Mrs. Henderson wept openly throughout the service, declaring afterward that she had never seen a more perfect match. The years that followed brought both challenges and blessings, as all marriages do. There were difficult winters when the cattle struggled and money was tight, joyful springs when new calves were born and the ranch prospered, and quiet summers when the three of them worked side by side, building something lasting and beautiful. Rose grew into a confident young woman who combined her father's strength with her stepmother's grace and intelligence. She would later write in her journal about the profound impact of watching Nathan and Evangeline build their marriage on mutual respect, genuine affection, and the daily choice to choose love over selfishness. But perhaps the most meaningful testament to their love story came years later, when Rose brought her own children to visit the ranch where she had grown up. As they sat on the same front porch where Nathan had first declared his love, one of her daughters asked about the wedding dress that hung in a place of honor in the main bedroom. "That dress," Rose explained, "belonged to your grandmother Evangeline when she was young. She wore it on what should have been the worst day of her life, when a selfish man abandoned her at the altar. But instead of giving up, she found the courage to start over. And that's how she found us." She paused, looking out at the thriving ranch that had become a legacy of love and perseverance. "You see," Rose continued, "sometimes what looks like an ending is really a beginning in disguise. Grandmama taught me that the most beautiful things in life often come from the most unexpected places, and that real love is worth waiting for, even when it comes in ways you never imagined." The wedding dress remained on display as a reminder of the truth that had shaped their family, that disappointment could lead to joy, that strangers could become family, and that sometimes the most profound love stories began not with passion, but with simple kindness offered to someone in need. In the end, Harold Wickham's abandonment had been the greatest gift he could have given Evangeline, though neither of them realized it at the time. By failing to show up that rainy June morning, he had freed her to find something infinitely more precious than the security he had offered. A love that saw her true worth, a child who called her angel, and a home where she belonged not because of what she could provide, but simply because of who she was. And on quiet evenings, when Nathan and Evangeline sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, they would remember that first day when a freckle-faced little girl had seen past the mud and tears to recognize an angel who had indeed come from heaven, sent not to rescue them, but to be rescued by them, and in that mutual rescue, to find the kind of love that transforms ordinary lives into something extraordinary. If this story of unexpected blessings, second chances, and the transformative power of genuine love touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need to be reminded that our greatest disappointments often lead to our most beautiful beginnings. Your support helps these stories reach those who may be walking through their own difficult seasons, showing them that sometimes the most profound love comes not when we're at our best, but when we're at our most vulnerable. Thank you for being part of a community that believes in the power of kindness, the beauty of chosen family, and the truth that real love always recognizes worth, even when it's hidden beneath pain and circumstance.